All right, looks like we're at the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Q Mangus. I'm the product marketing manager here at Micro Focus, and we're joined today by Michael Osterman from Osterman Research. We're really excited to bring you this webinar about Enterprise Vault cost analysis, um, and hope that you can enjoy what we're going to present to you and can find it beneficial. A few things to take note of as we're going through. If you do have questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free to put those through in the question panel there in GoToWebinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so feel free to share this with others. We'll be sending out a recording here shortly, an email with that recording, with the link to that recording. And of course, Michael Osterman will be walking us through this presentation today. We're really excited to have him on the call today. Michael is an industry expert and is the president and founder of Osterman Research. He has over 27 years of experience in the high-tech research industry and has spent about 16 years of those following specifically the messaging and collaboration industries. We're really excited to have him here, and once again, excited that all of you can be here as well. We'll go ahead and turn the time over to Michael and go from there. Michael, the time is yours.
Well, Q, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here on the call with us today. We're going to be going through some costs that we developed in our cost model, looking at Enterprise Vault and providing some of the background on that as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Here we go. Perfect. Thank you. Just a little bit of background on Osterman Research. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and as Q mentioned, our focus really is on the messaging, web, and collaboration industries. We look at really any technology that allows people to communicate or collaborate in a workplace context. So we look at things like archiving, security, content management, encryption, authentication, basically any technology that enables the improvement of communication or collaboration. We have a very strong emphasis on primary research. We're continually doing research with IT decision makers and influencers, really trying to understand what organizations are going through, the problems that they experience, where they like to cut costs, where they're going to make investments, and so forth. The company was founded in 2001, and we're based near Seattle. Next slide, please. Q, I'm just going to let you advance the slides because I seem to be having just a bit of an issue with that here. So I want to stress right up front that Osterman Research is an independent market research and consulting firm. Our focus really is not, choosing one vendor over another. It's not really, being in the back pocket of any vendor. So anything we say about Enterprise Vault is not really meant to denigrate Veritas, Enterprise Vault, or Symantec, before them, and so forth. So the goal here is really just to present objective information based on the assumptions that we built into our cost model, and we'll go through those assumptions so you really understand where we're coming from. And fundamentally, our goal is just to call it as we see it. Again, we're not endorsing any particular archiving platform, and certainly not denigrating any. Really, just trying to call things as we see them. Next slide, please. So Enterprise Vault, as we all know, is really one of the premier legacy archiving systems in use today. It has been around for a very long time, going back to its KVS heritage in the 1990s, and it's been a very successful platform, first for KVS, then for Symantec, and now for Veritas. There are deployments of more than 200,000 users in some cases, and Enterprise Vault really is very widely used in the industry. It's a very solid platform, and it does a good job at archiving. There are some deficiencies in it that we won't get in here today, such as in terms of search performance and so forth. But certainly it is a very solid platform, and it's in use by literally tens of thousands of customers around the world. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do is develop a cost model that would accurately analyze the costs of Enterprise Vault over the range of about 1,000 to 5,000 users. We did not consider those really large deployments of 200,000 users or very small deployments of maybe just a couple of hundred. We wanted to get right in that mid-range where most of the market is, between 1,000 and 5,000 users. Those organizations that that are large enough to have archiving requirements and sophisticated archiving requirements, but not so large that they need a system that will support necessarily, 200,000 or more users. So what we did is we said on the user side, we're going to assume that there are 20 megabytes of archived content per user per workday. Now, obviously that varies widely by, size of organization. It varies widely by the industry that you serve, by the specific archiving requirements you might have and so forth. But 20 megabytes of archived content per day between messages and the attachments in them, as well as other content like files, is really a pretty good average. We're also assuming in this model that content is stored for 7 years. Now, one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how long do we retain content? And we've recently published a data retention guide that goes through the requirements for archiving, and they're really all over the map. There are some requirements as low as a year, some that are indefinite, some that are 30 years, 5 years, 3 years, 7 years. 7 years is a pretty good average, particularly when you're looking at organizations, for example, in the financial services space, in insurance, and in several other industries. 7 years is actually a pretty good average, although what we find in many cases is that organizations will establish a limit of, okay, we'll keep our data for 7 years, but when they reach that point, they're not exactly sure if they should delete it. So very often that content gets stored for longer periods, even beyond the period that they initially set up. So, again, we're going to go with 7 years as an average. We also assumed that in terms of the infrastructure for Enterprise Vault, there would be 1,250 users per Enterprise Vault server. And again, that can vary, but 1,250 is a pretty good average. 10,000 users per Compliance Accelerator or Discovery Accelerator server, 2,500 users per SQL server in the environment, and also 2,500 users per Backup Exec server. And again, these can vary, all over the map, depending on the size of the organization, how distributed you are, and so forth. But these are pretty good averages for the organizations we were examining in that range of 1,000 to 5,000 users. We also assumed that there would be 1,500 users supported per full-time equivalent IT staff member. And we also assumed, sorry for the text being cut off there, we also assumed a fully burdened annual salary of $65,000 for an IT staff member that is tasked with managing the Enterprise Vault environment. And again, this can vary all over the map as well and can have an impact on cost. If you're dealing with somebody in New York City versus somebody in rural Kansas, you're going to get some, very wide disparities in terms of salary ranges, and that can have an impact on the cost of ownership for any platform, but in particular Enterprise Vault. Next slide, please. What we also assumed is that all of the software is deployed on a Dell PowerEdge R930 rack server, and we used standard list pricing here that we got from Dell. We also assume that content is stored on Dell's PowerVault MD3060E platforms. And again, we have done cost modeling in the past for Enterprise Vault that looked at Centera, which tends to be more expensive. You can use less expensive storage than the Dell PowerVault solution that we chose. But this is a pretty good mid-range platform. We also assume that all of the hardware in the Enterprise Vault environment is supported with either 2 to 4 hour on-site service response, really because archiving tends to be a mission-critical type of platform for most organizations that have deployed it, particularly when you're looking at organizations, let's say in the financial services industry, that can tolerate virtually zero downtime. Also, annual maintenance costs for software we assume to be 20%, which again is a pretty good average. And we also assume that all systems include a redundant failover capability, so that if the primary solution goes down, you can immediately fall back to a failover system. And we chose public sources for all of the hardware and software elements. We didn't want to assume some discounting that wasn't publicly available. So that can, if you get some deep discounts, for example, on hardware, or if perhaps in your environment you can reuse hardware, or you get really deep discounts on software, that can have some impact on the pricing, but we wanted to use public sources really just to be as transparent as we could. We also assumed in terms of power that each server and storage platform is going to consume 850 watts per hour, and that power is priced at 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And this doesn't have a huge impact on costs, but we really wanted to be complete in our analysis and consider the power cost as well, because that can have an impact on total cost of ownership in maybe a significant way in places where power is very expensive or more difficult to come by, such as New York City or maybe San Francisco. And again, we calculated the cost over the range of 1,000 to 5,000 users. So you really can't extrapolate from the costs we're going to present, to much larger organizations or to much smaller ones, because there are some different dynamics involved there as well. Next slide, please. So what we found is that software and support, really is the biggest single component of the overall cost of ownership for Enterprise Vault. For example, at 1,000 users, it represents 40% of the total cost of ownership for Vault, and at 5,000 users, it represents almost half. Hardware had just the inverse relationship. It was about half the cost, for smaller organizations, and increased somewhat for larger ones. And as you can see here, that was for labor. Hardware and support, went down from 29% of the total at 1,000 users to 14%. So a fairly small component of total cost of ownership at the larger end of the user range. And as you can see here, power was a relatively small component overall. It had, some contribution to cost of ownership for Vault, but not really a significant amount. Next slide, please. So what we found is that the cost of Enterprise Vault is, fairly significant. We're looking at 1,000 users being $14.85 per user per month. And it's important to note that we considered a 4-year cost of ownership here. And we'll get into some of the implications of that here in just a bit. So we weren't looking at a shorter or longer time frame, looking at 4 years, which really obviously has an impact on the cost of ownership, as we'll get into here in just a moment. At 5,000 users, that cost drops to $10.32 per user per month. And so fundamentally, what we're looking at is that at the low end of this user range, we have some fairly significant costs for Vault. And when you double the number of users, you get a very significant drop as you go from 1,000 to 2,000 users, and then really very little drop after that. And that's really because you're amortizing the cost of the hardware, the software, and so forth over a larger user base. And because of some of the assumptions we used, a large number of users for a compliance accelerator server or discovery accelerator server, the cost of ownership, certainly doesn't change as much as you add more users. Next slide, please. So looking at the cost of ownership for an environment of 2,500 users, what we saw is that the total cost of ownership for Vault for this 2,500 user environment is a little over $1.3 million over the 4 years that we looked at. Annually, that works out to, obviously a much smaller amount, and on a per user basis over that 4 years, it's about $538. Annually per user, about $134, and on a monthly basis, $11.20. And one of the fundamental reasons we want to look at a monthly per user cost is because more and more organizations are going to cloud-based archiving, and they're charged on a monthly basis per user. So we wanted to provide as much as possible of an apples to apples comparison, really showing the cost of Vault over 4 years, so that organizations could compare that with costs of cloud-based archiving. In the research that we've done and the forecasts we've done, we see a growing proportion of organizations migrating to cloud-based archiving for a number of reasons. In part because it's easier to deploy, you have low upfront costs, and also because a lot of organizations are simply moving to the cloud. Office 365 is the prime example of that, where today there are actually more users on Office 365 than there are on on-premises Exchange. And as part of greater cloud initiatives, organizations are realizing that maybe everything should be in the cloud. So if they're moving their users to Office 365 or CRM or some other platform in the cloud, it simply makes sense to offer cloud-based archiving for that content as well. Next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to look at too was replacement costs. And again, our model accounted for just a 4-year lifespan for the enterprise vault environment that we were evaluating. But if an organization needs to do a refresh in year 5, what we found is that the cost increases significantly for obvious reasons, because now you're having to do a hardware refresh, so you have brand new hardware being purchased. So that monthly per user cost would go from $11.20 in our 2,500 user environment up to $12.74. And that represents a jump of 14%. So that's a fairly significant jump when you consider the 5-year lifespan of an enterprise vault environment as opposed to just a 4-year lifespan. And it's also important to note that what we did not include in that 5-year analysis is the cost of the IT labor that's necessary to evaluate the new hardware platforms that are going to be deployed, the procurement costs, the deployment costs, configuration, accounting for all of the problems that come up as you add new hardware and so forth. So it's important to understand that the lifespan of a particular system for an on-premises environment is really fairly sensitive to the overall lifespan that you choose. So if you choose 4-year with no replacement cost, it's typically going to be significantly less than, for example, if you choose 5-year with replacement cost. And we wanted to consider the replacement cost because really it's a more realistic way to approach the total cost of ownership, really for any platform. First, because all infrastructure periodically needs to be replaced. And, 4-year lifespan for hardware is going to be short in some cases, it's going to be long in others, but it's typically a pretty good lifespan for a piece of hardware. Also, considering the replacement costs really does provide more of that apples to apples comparison for cloud solutions that might be competitive with an on-premises solution like Enterprise Vault. So fundamentally, you really do need to consider replacement and longer lifespans for a platform as part of your overall analysis. Next slide, please. So in summary, Enterprise Vault really is a pretty capable platform. It can archive a wide variety of content from email to social media to files and so forth. And the support is good, and it comes really from a vendor with quite a strong reputation and quite a good heritage in the archiving space. The problem, though, is that Vault tends to be relatively expensive compared to a lot of alternatives in the archiving space, especially those in the cloud. And so it's important to understand that it's critical to really understand the cost of ownership, not just for a set period of time, but also to add those variables of replacement costs and looking at things over the longer term, simply so you get a better understanding of what those costs will be long term. Okay, next slide, please. That concludes my part of the presentation, sort of short and sweet. And Q, I will hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Michael. Great information. Really, yeah, it's eye-opening to see, and I can see that was a lot of work to get that information out. So thank you for sharing that with us. As always, really great to hear from you, Michael, and to hear this information. And as you can see, there's his contact information if you'd like more and like to reach out to him. To finish up, we did have an hour slated, but it looks like we'll be at about 25 minutes, so that's good. We'll give you some time back. But I just want to touch on a little bit about the archiving solutions that Micro Focus offers. So we, with the acquisition of HP Enterprise Software, we have a couple of solutions, and of course the acquisition of Guava as well. We do have a new portfolio that we can offer everybody in the sense of digital, safe, and retain. So there are different use cases for each one of these solutions. I'm going to just give you a brief overview, and if you'd like more information about one or the other of these archiving solutions, please reach out to us. You can visit us at microfocus.com to get more information. But Digital Safe, this solution there's some key principles that I just wanted to touch on. It is a fully cloud-based solution. It is secure and compliant with encryption, cyber defense, that multi-tenant platform. There's analytics to be able to get at your data and see what's going on with the information that is archived. It is flexible and scalable, so depending on the size of your organization, it is something that can be used in your organization. And then there's the cost-efficient scale as well. It does have an open platform to be able to have APIs that can integrate with Digital Safe, unified archive where all the different platforms that you are using can be archived in one central location. And of course, we rely heavily on our customers to make sure that we're developing the solution that will be best for them. And so that's the digital safe solution. Um, and I'd encourage you to learn more about that. And then, of course, we have a solution which is Retain Unified Archiving, which is a central archive of all your email, mobile, social media, and instant messaging. And all of that is stored in one central archive. And we have built-in e-discovery tools to be able to rapidly search your archive, be able to get to your data, and this solution can be deployed on premise or in the cloud, depending on your needs. And so that's really the use case. If it depends on the type of industry that you're in. For Digital Safe, we're primarily focused on financial, and we have some of the largest banks in the world that are using Digital Safe. And Retain is a cross-industry solution that can be used in any industry. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to look into those solutions and reach out to us at microfocus.com. And once again, I'd like to thank Michael for his time. I'm going to go through and see if there's any questions here. If you have questions about the information that we presented, feel free to put those through. I don't see any at this time. Um, so, yeah, it looks like we must have covered all the questions that we may have had. Once again, one other thing I did want to make mention of is that all those who have registered for this webinar will be receiving the white paper that goes along with this webinar, which is the Enterprise Vault Cost Analysis from Osterman Research. So thanks everyone for being here and for your interest in this topic. And thank you, Michael, once again for presenting this information. And I hope you all have a
It's
good
my
day.
pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, have a good one. Thanks everyone.